Welcome back to the Batty Girls Book Club podcast. I'm Stephanie.
And I'm Danielle.
And we are two chatty baddies who love to talk about books. For today's episode, we are going to be talking about one of our favorite book subgenres, and you guessed it, that's Romantasy.
We also have an exciting author spotlight, so stick around to the end of the episode so you do not miss out on us chatting with Courtney Blooming, who wrote an incredible debut romantasy novel called Threads of Fate. Now, what even is romantasy? Romantasy is actually one of the fastest growing genres, which makes sense. We have like the biggest authors on the market right now busting out new romantasies. We have Sarah J. Maas, we have Rebecca Yarros, we have all of these hot authors coming out with new romantasies, and we're eating it up. So romantasy, if you have not figured it out yet, is the combination of romance and fantasy. And on their own, we love them both, but together, they're even better. And I was reading a bit about how, like, people define a romantasy book by having pretty equal parts of both.
I don't think that I'm someone who enjoys just plain fantasy. Like, I need that part to be a big portion of the plot for me to be invested in the world. I feel like you don't need romance.
No, I don't need no romance. I just need some action. I need some good world building. But don't get me wrong, I love romantasy. I love having that like tension and the character dynamics between a love interest. I think it does add to the plot and the experience for me and my like excitement about the book. But I very much enjoy like a plot centered around this badass female. I just love that, like rising through all of her, struggles and just overcoming. I just love that. And I can see you being the person who needs the extra romance.
The complete opposite.
Sure. I feel like reading romantasy has helped me become more interested in romance again, but it doesn't feel the same when it doesn't have the fantasy elements for me.
Yeah, I get that. I'm a sucker for a good love story. My friend Steph, shout out, she actually said this to me a few months ago, and it was right after I finished, I think it was both ACOTAR and Fourth Wing, so I was so new to romantasy and didn't quite know a lot about all of these books yet. She said she has to do lots of palate cleansers in between reading different types of romantasy, fantasy, any types of books like that, because a lot of them have or can have really repetitive plot schemes. You got to take a little breather in between.
I don't think I can read back to back anything. Like, I agree. I feel like between any genres, like I can read a couple in a row, but then I'm like, okay, like I need to switch it up a little bit. And I feel like that really coincides with being a mood reader too, because my mood changes. Okay, I'm not always going to be in the mood for the same thing. So let's transition into romantasy tropes. We have fated mates. We have enemies to lovers or friends to lovers, forbidden love, strong, independent heroines. You already know how I feel about that one. Class differences, often presented as different like fantasy species, which I was like, yeah, that tracks. And then love triangles. Ew! Steph, what are your tops out of these?
Slow burn romantasy, I genuinely think, is my favorite kind of book ever, but slow burn is not specific to romantasy, but like a slow burn romantasy book
hits different.
Like, it just hits different. So I love fated mates. I know some people are like, oh, it's so cliche. Love, it's the best. It's amazing.
I did not think I would like fated mates because I'm not necessarily like everyone has a soulmate kind of girl, which like cool beans if you are. I'm just not that girl. It's okay. But so fated mates for me, I was like, I don't know how I'm going to feel about it. I love it. I'm like, yes, they were destined to be together. This, whatever trauma brought them together, this event brought them together. I love it. I love it.
I love it.
Strong independent heroines, absolute top. I think about these women often. I love them. They're like my personal besties. They keep me going. I'm just a girl's girl too. So I'm like empowering women. Yes, we love it. I absolutely love that. And yeah, that's probably my favorite. Love triangle. I actually don't think that's my favorite. Steph loves it.
I feel like I don't want to say I love it. I like it for the plot.
Yeah.
like a why choose, as long as we choose, because I'm a monogamous girly. I think I like forbidden love more than I like enemies to lovers. If you are newer to exploring romantasy, I think there's 2 books that you absolutely have to read. It's your rite of passage to get into romantasy. The ACOTAR series by Sarah J. Maas or the Empyrean series by Rebecca Yarros. Both of them you have to read.
Yeah,
I don't make the rules, sorry.
I just enforce them.
I think in that similar vein, another book that I think is a really easy start into romantasy is Powerless. You and I both read it. We loved it. It was such an easy read. That's a book that I would say is very 50-50 split between the romance plot and the fantasy plot. As far as books that are on our TBR, there's a never-ending list.
Truly. Yeah, I agree.
A never-ending list of romantasy reads for us. But I accidentally, while I was going through my list of books that are on our TBR, coincidentally, the ones that I picked are all on Kindle Unlimited. So
perfect.
Love that. So in no particular order, we want to read the Crowns of Nyaxia series by Carissa Broadbent. What I've learned about this book, it's a planned 6-book series, but Carissa, she's doing the books in duologies. It follows our female main character, Oraya, which is a human who's raised by a vampire king, and she competes in a deadly tournament by the goddess of death, and she must make a very risky alliance. The next one that I keep seeing being recommended, the Kingdom of Lies series by Stasia Stark. There's 3 books in the series right now. A Court This Cruel and Lovely. This is the one that I've been seeing. I've heard that it's spicy, so I'm like, okay, I'm ready.
Sign her up.
Yeah, I think it gets like increasingly more spicy as the books go on, but I think that's probably why it's on my page. So there's A Court This Cruel and Lovely. There's A Kingdom This Cursed and Empty, and A Crown This Cold and Heavy. The 4th book is coming out this month, actually, the end of this month. So now would be a good time to start it. So in this book, the world that they're in order to be protected from the Fae, magic is sacrificed. No one has magic, and if you possess magic, it's a punishable act by death. The female main character, she does still have magic, apparently, and she's capable of changing the future of all the kingdoms. Again, this does supposedly have a thick romance plot in it. The next one is the Gods and Monsters series by Amber Nicole, and another book that I feel like Book Talk and Bookstagram, it's getting a lot of hype, but it's not one of those like bigger authors, so we're here to hype it up again. So there's 2 books out right now, Book of Azrael and The Throne of Broken Gods. The 3rd book is also coming out this month, so again, if you're looking for something that's not a really overwhelming series to start, this is the one. So I'll just like a brief summary. There's a forgotten king. He's hiding from the world, leaving everyone around him to deal with aftermath of war until an attack forces him and an enemy to work together to save their world. This book, the female main character is the enemy, and he is like the chosen one. So what I like about that is it takes this like really, I don't want to say overused, but this really similar plot line, and it kind of flips it on us. That one has made a lot of people's 5-star reads list of the year, so I'm definitely excited about that one. Another one that's a little bit more well-known is the Bridge Kingdom series by Danielle Jensen. Again, on KU. It's a 4-book series. I don't think it's finished yet, and this one is about a little warrior princess, and she's driven by 2 certainties. By the way, this is a copy paste from Goodreads because it was too good for me to try and summarize on my own. Her 2 certainties are that King Aaron of the Bridge Kingdom is her enemy, and the second is that she will be the one to bring him to his knees. And then she begins to question if she's the hero or the villain, and her feelings for Aaron transform from frosty hostility to fierce passion. So she has to choose which kingdom to save and which one to destroy. Love that. This is a true arranged marriage. Who did this to you? One bed, forced proximity, secret identity, like all those really.
It's everything we love.
Yeah.
I'm sold.
Yeah. Okay, and then the last one we're going to recommend for today is the Crystal Bloom series by Sarah A. Parker. The one that I'm seeing everywhere is, of course, the first book in the series. It's called To Bleed a Crystal Bloom. The second book is called To Snap a Silver Stem, and the third is called To Flame a Wild Flower. This is a dark reimagining of Rapunzel. Apparently, it's a little bit loosely based. So we have a female main character who, she survives a massacre when she's a younger, I want to say maybe she's 2 years old when she survives a massacre, and she now is living a life confined in this castle. What I'm hearing is that it's half volunteering to be in this castle because she feels safe in the castle, and half is it because this High Master Okruth is keeping her in this castle. He's described as being her almost executioner, but also her savior and protector. So I'm like, I don't know what that means. I will caveat by saying I've heard this book does have a little bit of age gap romance. So if that's not your thing, if it gives you the ick, this is not the book for you.
Okay. Wow, that was so amazing. Thank you for giving us all these recs. Also, I want your TikTok algorithm because some of these have not shown up in my feed yet, and I am subscribed to them already.
I love to hear that. With that, we are so excited to introduce our author spotlight for our Romantasy episode, which is C.A. Blooming, who wrote a slow burn romantasy called Threads of Fate. Hello, C.A. Blooming.
Woo! Welcome, welcome. We're so excited to have you. We loved your book. We're so excited to talk about it and share it with others. We talked a little bit in the beginning of this episode about the romantasy genre as a whole, different recommendations we have, and we thought it would be absolutely perfect to join forces for this episode and spotlight your new work. And we wanted to know if you could just tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and what got you into writing, into fantasy, and ultimately writing your first novel.
Yeah, so I have been a lifelong reader. I can remember reading as young as like 7 or 8, and it's always been fantasy. I have always leaned towards fantasy, and I had my kids really young, so I stopped reading for 10 years. And last year in January, we lost a family member, and reading became my way of coping with it was very sudden, and so I randomly picked up ACOTAR. Amazon had been recommending it to me for months, and I was like, okay, whatever, I'm going to read again, and I was hooked. And I didn't know romantasy was a thing up to this point. I think romantasy existed for quite a while before ACOTAR and all these things that got kind of the genre name, but I didn't know it was a genre, and then I binged for the first 6 months of 2023. And prior to 2023, I had never thought of being an author. I was strictly a reader. I was strictly read a book, love it. I always loved to write in English classes, and I love classic literature, and I love all that stuff. But writing a book was never on the forefront of my mind. I wrote poetry, but it was always I don't want to be an author. But I always daydreamed about what I was reading, so my book, Threads of Fate, is a mortal modern-day woman who comes into the land of gods. I love stories like that. You've got Chronicles of Narnia. You've got all these books of someone coming from one world to another. And in May, I think, of 2023, I started thinking of the story. There was one song on Spotify that kind of ignited this imagination, and I couldn't stop. I couldn't stop thinking about it. And it was the first time I'd gone into an office in 3 years. I'd been working from home. So I had 30 minutes to and from work 3 days a week, every day. I'm just in the car, and I was just ooh, what if there was this, and what if there was this, and what if she falls into this world and she speaks French, and somehow he speaks French too. And so I think it was July 27th, I had ended work for the day, and I'm sitting on my computer, and I just started, and I wrote, and I wrote and wrote and wrote for about a day and a half collectively in time frame between work, and I had 4 chapters, and I was like, there's a book. And I go to my husband, and I'm nervous because he's always wanted to be an author. He hasn't taken the time to write yet, and he's always like, I'll do it when our kids get older. So I just nervously went to him, and I was like, I wrote a book. And he's like, what?
Yes.
I'm 4 chapters in. Can I read it to you? And he was just like, what is happening right now? And then I just kept going. And I wrote Threads of Fate in 3.5 weeks.
That's
because
crazy.
I started in July, end of July, and I had my next school semester starting. And I was like, I have to finish this book before school starts. And I finished the evening my semester started.
That is
Oh
crazy.
my gosh.
It was And I did a live with some authors a few weeks ago, but I said before this point, I kind of just went through life. Most of what I did, I was okay at, but I had never had this desire outside of reading. Reading was always my thing. People always knew I had a book, even though I took a hiatus. When I started reading again, no one was surprised. So I never realized that there was something waiting for me, even though I didn't want to be an author my whole life. The moment I started writing, I was like, there's nothing else I can imagine doing. There's nothing else in this world I can see myself doing. Kind of this self-discovery of who I am and what I meant to do after just kind of going through life and just kind of doing what people think is right. Loved being a mom. I loved being a stay-at-home mom for 5 years, but it was like, I can't do this forever. I got a corporate job and it was like, I'm really good with people. I'm good at this. But it was like, okay, I guess I'll just kind of do it. And now I look at my future and I'm like, ooh, I'm going to have this publishing, writing empire. And I have just all these plans. And it's been an interesting, it hasn't even been a year yet. It's been what, 10, like 8, 9 months.
And your whole life and like perspective is different than what you expect. And I love people that have these like non-traditional roles. Like we're expected to like get a job, stay in that job, grow in that job, and then you find something that you're so passionate about later in life than you probably expected, and you're like, wait, this is it. Like this is so fulfilling. This is like the creative juices are flowing. Like this feels so right. Yeah. And I love that you use your commute wisely, because I commute 45 minutes each way. And I could be doing something like, I don't know, writing a book. I'm like, I'm just sitting there listening to Taylor Swift, crying. Yeah. You really use it wisely.
Yeah, it was just thinking. It was just spiraling into this daydream. And then once I started writing, it was then like, oh, so what's this next chapter going to be? But part of it, I thought I was just going to write it down and get it out of my head. Like get those few things that I kept imagining. And then I just couldn't stop. And I'm like, hey, I've got something here. And it's been fun. And then I decided to self-publish, which has been a roller coaster of an experience. I did query a little bit, but then I had this gut feeling. I go by my gut with a lot of my life, and everything in me was like, spring, early summer, 2024. And I was like, what is going on? And I did some queries, and I was like, you know what? I really want to publish my book on my 30th birthday. And that's June 1st. And so I told my husband, I was like, we're going to have to pay for self-publishing. And he goes, okay.
He's like, all right, I support you.
Yeah. And then to top all of this off, it's been such an emotional journey. I was actually one of the recipients of the LJ Andrews Indie Author Scholarship.
Oh my
goodness.
And yeah. So it's been this just like incredible, kind of feels like the universe is clicking into place. Like, this is meant to happen situation. And that was crazy. It was the day I got the email. I'm sitting here in my office and I've been waiting all day. I'm just like, and I don't know if I got it. And I look up and I see her name on an email and my husband's talking to me and I just stopped and I start crying and he's like, are you okay? And I was like, and I stood up and then I sat back down. I was like, I can't do this. I can't talk. And he was like, what is happening? I'm like, I got it. And then it was an emotional week of like constant crying.
It's so validating.
It feels like the type of situation when the right time, right place, and you find yourself doing what you were meant to do after not really quite knowing what you're supposed to be doing.
And I can tell just by reading it, like, you were meant to do this. It's not like, oh, somebody wrote a book because they like wanted to write. No. Like this story like had to be shared with other people. I already have told like 4 people about it. I'm so excited about it and genuinely really, really enjoyed it. And it was written so beautifully. So you should be so proud of yourself for doing that. That's incredible.
Yeah, I've really loved the story.
You said your husband really wanted to become an author, but, you know, it's just there hasn't been time for him to do that yet. And then what you were sharing with us beforehand about how he's helped you with a lot of this process, I feel like for him, it's probably really fulfilling, too, to be able to, even though he hasn't got the time to do it for himself yet, it's like he is still part of this journey with you. And I love that. That's just really fun to be able to do that with a partner.
That's what he's actually told me that, because I'll constantly be like, you've wanted to be an author since I've met you. And I'm like, oh, I feel like I'm kind of taking something from you. And he's like, absolutely not. And he's the one who says, right time, right place. He's like, this was your time. And he's like, if this makes it so I can write like a few years from now, he's like, then that's what it is. And so he's been so actively involved in creating this storyline and creating all these like characters and the world and the series. And he's just, every time we get into a planning or plotting session, in a sense, I don't necessarily call it plotting because we'll spend hours, and then it'll be like 2 o'clock in the morning, and he's like, oh my gosh, that was great. And sometimes I'll just go start writing again, or I'll wake up and I'm like, I gotta write down what we did. And so it's been such a fun experience. My kids have heard it. They don't know, a lot about, they don't Romantasy, so it's not necessarily kid friendly, but my one daughter, she's 7, she'll be like, Mom, so Aura has magic.
Yes.
And they'll talk about my characters. And it's been such a fun experience as a family. Just something that we never expected to happen has come into our lives.
I love that so much. And it's probably so inspiring for your kiddos too. And if your husband, not if, but when your husband writes his book, we'd love to have him on here too. We can have, a wife-husband session. Yeah, the whole family authors. I also need to know what song inspired the book for you.
So that's technically two. So there was, I think they're Fish in the Birdcage, I think is what they're called. There's one called Magic. Okay. And then, I can never remember her name, but it's a song, Donier Dance.
Oh, okay.
The French song. It really inspired, you'll have
to
listen to I could not hold a conversation in French, but I can read French if someone's speaking fully to me. I can understand it, so I can understand the song. And so the song was just like great, and I didn't ever write the scene. I had this whole concept, I never did, to this song, and I would just listen to it. That song and Magic by Fish in the Birdcage, and it was just constantly playing in the car while I imagined the story.
I love that. I'm really into listening to quiet, peaceful music while I read. I really enjoy like having that background. So I think that would be really fun to listen to, and just picturing the like characters and the storyline and everything like that.
Yeah. So I'm very music driven. So I have all these scenes to songs. I mean, there's constant moments I'm like, ooh, that fits that and that. I've always been a musically driven person. I work listening to music. I do homework listening to music. Music has been, as much as reading is a part of my life,
I feel that as well, very much so.
And I love when either authors or people who have read a certain book will make a playlist for it that's like intended to follow the book or fits the vibe of the book. I love that.
Me too.
And you have one.
She has a We have to listen.
It's funny, the 2 songs I just mentioned actually aren't on there, but I definitely have a playlist for Threads of Fate that fits the vibes of the book.
And speaking of just fitting the vibe of the book, something I have to applaud you on, Danny's gonna laugh when I say this, the fact that you put fan art at the beginning of the book, it really, I'm not trying to be funny. Here's what I do. So every single time I start a book, my imagination goes absolutely wild. And so then I go on like TikTok or Instagram and I'll search blah, blah, fan art. And then I get spoiled. It happens every single time. And so when I started your book and I flipped the first page, I was like, this is great. I'm not getting spoiled. And then I flipped another couple of pages and there's my female main character. I say thank you for not spoiling me. I love the idea. It really is. It's a very nice touch. I loved it.
That is so funny that you mentioned the spoiling, because I recommended ACOTAR to my sister, and I think she was halfway through the second book, and I get this text, and she's like, I looked up fan art. I don't even know if she was halfway through the second book. And I was like, oh no. And she tells me the fan art she saw, and I was like, oh no.
Yes.
I was like, I have failed you. I have failed you as a sister. And so for me, I love fan art. I love character art. And I really just wanted people to be able to envision the characters. I definitely, if people don't agree with the character art, I'm like, go and do your own thing. However you envision these people, like, do it yourself. But I like it. I've had a couple of ARC readers have the same thing, that they really love the fan art at the character art at the beginning of the book. When the book publishes, there will be you'll see, Stephanie, when you get all the way to the end, there are a couple more. I'm going to rescatter them, and there will be one more, if I can get it done in time, that is done in the book. So
I love
I will
that.
continue that trend in all of my books, where there will be these little character art portraits before, like, you introduce the character or, like, key moments with the character.
For people who don't agree with your character art, you wrote the book, so you know what you pictured. And people can picture whatever they want anyways, but
Yeah.
no, I love like seeing like how you envisioned it, because Steph and I have talked about this before. Like, we will read the same book and we have 100% different ideas about what people look like, what we pictured when they were talking about this character or side character. So I love that very much. And I have gotten many texts from Steph saying, hey, can you send me non-spoiler fan art for this book? And I'm like, yeah, I got you, girl.
Most authors will have fan art or character art that they've
Yeah.
commissioned. So if you want to look up the author first.
I love that.
Because they
Okay.
probably have character art on their
Before
account.
TikToking
And
it.
the author's not, most of the time, is not going to want to spoil big
Yes.
things. They might have like a don't click on this if you don't want a spoiler
Yes.
type of thing. But I'm seeing more authors will have fan art, either they're tagged in and they'll share it, like repost it, or they themselves will do it. I know Carissa Broadbent
Yes.
is big on the character art. And so if you want to see her characters, you could go to her account and you could see like what her characters she's envisioned. So there's a tip.
Yeah. I also just want to talk about a little bit how you had mentioned on your Instagram that this book has some Outlander vibes. And that for me, like, I'm an Outlander girly. That is what sucked me in immediately to being like, yes, we need to read this. We need her on here. Can you tell us what type of readers would be drawn to your book? What are the main tropes that you have going on in your story?
Yeah, so I think anyone who loves ACOTAR would probably love my book. Outlander people, anyone that loves things like Outlander, Chronicles of Narnia,
Yes.
the concept of someone coming from one world going into another, right? And not like, oh, this is a fantasy person, even with ACOTAR, right? Like Feyre is from the world, and she's
Yes.
kind of crossed into the Fey lands. This is not their world. They're in a completely new environment. Would love this book. I've been told by several readers that they compare it to like For Blood and Ash and Ember in the what is it?
I haven't
Yeah,
read
right.
yet. Yes.
So people will compare. I've had some people compare Roan to Nyktos. So people who love those books, anything with like discovering you have magic. So if you like Harry Potter, and this is like YA, but like discovering you have magic you've never known before and you thought you were just normal, people would love that book. People who love slow burn, and not just like, oh, this is kind of slow burn. Like my slow burn it's elongated. It is like agonizingly long slow burn. If you like that frustration of slow burn, you're really gonna love the book. It's all for a reason. There's lots of valid reasons why they don't immediately connect, even though there's like immediate attraction between the two of them, which I really love that aspect of the story. And then just like romantasy. And the biggest one, the mental health representation, is what I'm getting feedback on. People are really relating to Aura's mental health. And so people who want to kind of feel seen in anxiety and depression, and people who've had pretty difficult trauma growing up, and they're really going to relate to this book and really going to love watching her character go through things that she's kind of refused to face in herself and in her life.
Yeah, she's somebody who is like, I don't need no man. I do not want help. Like I related to that independence vibe where she's like, you do not need to do this for me. I can do this myself. That's very much me, to a fault sometimes. So I very much related to that and I love any book with mental health rep. I definitely love like the angstiness of their relationship. And would you categorize it also as an urban fantasy? Because it definitely like starting out in like present day France for me, and like everything was very relatable, technology, like everything was like felt very present day, and then going into this other land I was like, oh, it's giving me this like urban fantasy vibe, which I actually really enjoy. I'm learning.
I think there's definitely urban fantasy. I actually hadn't even like thought about that until you had said that. And I look at the series as it progresses, I'm like, oh, it definitely has this urban fantasy vibe, because you have Aura, who she's someone that a lot of people can relate to, and so she's thrown into this world. Like, I imagine Aura as like a secret bookstagram type of character. Like, she's got like sharing her books online. And so for her, she's kind of put in this world that she's always dreamt about. And she's like, what is going on? But you've got this element of her modern day, urban, and she'll say things where Roan is like, what are you
Yeah,
talking
what are you
about?
saying? France? What's
you know,
France? Yeah.
Yeah, and he'll like there's just this back and forth that I love between them because you have this character that is so modern and so real that, you know, I always joke like she is me and I am her,
Yeah.
and the way that she says things, and it's just so funny to me when they're interacting because she's read fantasy, so like when
Yes.
he's talking, it's not like she's questioning the things he's
Yes.
saying, whereas he's like, what is
What?
going on with this woman? Like,
Yeah,
what is
yeah.
coming out of her mouth right now? So I really love that aspect, and I think urban fantasy lovers would probably like this because it's a different take on urban fantasy. It's not Crescent City where it's an urban world with magic. It's an urban character coming into a fantasy world who loves fantasy.
Yeah,
So
and I definitely can see that it will probably have more urban elements in it too, like moving forward. And I feel like that's something to hype up because especially with Crescent City, I don't know much about it. I know it's an urban fantasy and I know that people love it. Like we're in an urban fantasy era too. Obviously, Romantasy is high and mighty and we love Romantasy, but urban fantasy is really coming out and becoming very popular too. So hype that up. I felt the urban fantasy vibes. I haven't read a ton of urban fantasy, but I definitely felt like I enjoy that aspect because you relate even more to the character because you're like, oh, she's from the world we live in today. It's very easy to picture. Yeah, I very
yeah,
much enjoyed that part of it.
that was one of my big goals with writing this book was along with making her relatable, the mental health aspect. I've always felt like there's some authors that do it well, but I've always felt like fantasy kind of skirts over mental health. It's kind of like, oh, I'm blue and I'm having a hard time. I'm gonna like fight it out, right? Like I'm gonna get in a fight with the guy that I'm supposed to fall in love with. You know, it
Yes.
doesn't ever fully address it. And so for me, I was like, if I take someone who any of us could meet on the street and throw them in a world where they, you know, I feel like there's a shift in society where we talk about mental health. So she, you know, we're going to talk about mental health with her and she's going to address those things and you're going to hear those inner thoughts that I feel like a lot of fantasy, you don't do it. You don't hear when you have someone who's struggling with like pretty deep depression or trying to fight off that depression. And that was one of my big motivations of making her a modern day character is to make her as relatable as possible, which is actually funny because originally I didn't think people would relate to her because she is very closed off. And all of my readers, oh my gosh, she's so relatable and da da da. And I'm like, wow, I really thought people were not going to like Aura because she is very closed off and she stops herself from things constantly because she doesn't want to let anyone in.
I feel like your book is such an amazing, could be such an incredible intro read for somebody who is like trying to get into fantasy, but not sure if they would like it. Like this book, I think would hook them and they'd be changed after that forevermore.
That's my hope. Get all of those fantasy readers in and just get hooked. Just pull them in and then be like, oh, by the way, there's this whole genre. Like,
Welcome. You have forever been ruined.
I know you can't stop.
Yes.
Like my sister prior to me, she had read Outlander, but I had to read my book, and she was like, I'm not really a fantasy person. She
Yeah.
loved my book, and then I got her to read Akatar, and she's like, I'm just enveloped in fantasy at this point, and she's like, I need a break from fantasy. I'm like, you know, I mean, I can definitely see when you're like back to back to back to back to back fantasy, you're just kind of like, who was
Yes.
who and whose magic was what, but
I
it's
agree.
I love fantasy. It's always been my comfort. I mean,
Yeah.
oh, so many of my books are just straight fantasy. It's fantasy is just around my life.
Danny and I were touching a little bit earlier about fantasy without romance, and there's romantasy. Do you feel like you are more of like a, ooh, I love fantasy, don't need the romance, or you are, I need the romance, it's straight romantasy for me? And then we would love if you have any recommendations.
I think I'm in the middle. So, like prior to last year, I had not read Romantasy. I always read fantasy, and a lot of my fantasy was like YA because I took such a long break from reading. I mean, I got married very young. I had my first child at 19. So, my fantasy books were very much YA. And so, until last year, I didn't even know Romantasy existed. I didn't know there was this genre of these like books with the romance and the fantasy aspect. And so I would say some of my favorite just straight fantasy books, my all-time favorite book, it's a YA, it's called East. So there is a Norwegian fairy tale called, it's like Into the West, Mood of the East, Into the West, or something like that. I can't remember. I feel bad that I can't remember it. But growing up, there was a Norwegian movie called The Polar Bear King. And it's Beauty and the Beast, if I understand correctly, is based off of this fairy tale. So it's the concept of a man or king has been cursed. He turns into a polar bear. She cannot know or see his face. And so they spend like every night together, like not in a romantic way, but they spend every night together, but she can't see his face for a year. And so East was a book based off of that. My comfort movie as a kid was The Polar Bear King. And East is just such a good book. It was one of the first books I read that had multiple point of views, so you're reading it from multiple people's points of view throughout the book. It's got just like such, there is kind of a YA romance aspect to it, but I mean, I read it I think when I was 12, and there was like not really anything I would say that was inappropriate. But that was very much my branch into these romantic relationship concepts with fantasy worlds, and then I got into Twilight.
Yes. Edward or Jacob? The people have to know.
I think now I'm so outside of that realm of thought process. I think as a teenager, I think I was Team Jacob.
I think I was too.
I think I was Team Jacob when I think back on it. I mean, my best friend might completely be like, no, because we were huge Twilight fans. But I think that I'm kind of a mix. I will completely read a fantasy book without the romance aspect to it if it's a good fantasy. But I'm really loving the romance aspect in the last year, and I'm really loving these like slow burns and these, just the romance that comes out along with the fantasy. But I think Romantasy has existed long before we had the genre, and now it's getting the hype that it deserves, that it is its own genre of writing and books.
I agree completely.
I'd say I'm a mix. I'm a mixed bag. Because, like, I loved ACOTAR. I loved Crescent City, which is much more on the romance aspect. But Throne of Glass is, I mean, there's, as the characters get a little older, there's a little bit more adult interaction, but not heavy. And so Throne of Glass, I'm like, this is amazing. You have to read every book of Throne of Glass. And so I'm definitely not like a give me all the spice type of reader.
I think it's so funny how I'll go, again, talking about the algorithm and like you interact with one post and that's your entire For You page for weeks to come. Views of books that I've read, and I'll be like, oh, that was like a 4 chili pepper book. And then someone else will be like, it's 1.5 chili peppers. I'm like,
I know.
I'm like, am I tame?
My book is not, I mean, I would personally probably rate it like a 2. And always people ask me like, oh, what would you rate this book? I'm like, I am the worst person to ask because very little will shock me. Very little will throw me out and I'll be like, I'm not reading that. And I haven't gotten into the dark romance personally. I just haven't picked it up. There's very many that I want to read. There's a lot that I want to read. But it's probably not going to bother me. I mean, when I was 18, I binged all of the 50 Shades of Grey books.
Oh, yeah.
It was a rite of passage into our adulthood.
So I very much have probably a very skewed scale. I don't know what it would take for me to read where I would be like, this is too much for me. So I want to read some dark romance because I can definitely see a lot of people have a healing aspect with dark romance. A lot of people feel seen in the concept of like it's dark, but most of the characters it's like a consensual thing.
Yes.
And so I can see the healing aspect for some people with dark romance. So I'm interested in it.
Yeah, I'm interested. Drop your recs below, everyone. And we definitely talked about what readers would be drawn to your book. Can you tell us some tropes that are in your book? Because I know people are really drawn into specific tropes. Yes. We talked a little bit in the beginning of this episode of some pretty popular tropes in Romantasy, so we'd love to let our listeners know what they can expect in your book.
So I think the biggest one is slow burn. Mental health rep. Found family is a big one. What's the other ones? I have one like strangers to lovers, which you don't think you see very often. You're always seeing like friends to lovers, enemies to lovers. But, like these are two complete strangers that, collide into each other. Another one I say is two worlds collide. So you literally have two different worlds coming together. I don't necessarily like to market it because I don't necessarily think it's a marketing aspect, but a lot of people are commenting on the LGBTQ plus representation in my book. Huge, huge thing for me to just people love people, and that's a normal aspect of life. So you're going to see that in my book.
I'm really loving how people are representing LGBTQIA plus in their books, but not marketing it specifically like, oh, this is, queer rep. This is why you should read this book. It's becoming normalized like it should be because it is a normal part of everyday life and people's experience. So I love that I can pick up a book and unexpectedly, like not even thinking this is going to be an aspect of it, be reading a character who's LGBTQIA plus. I'm like, this is what this world needs more of. And I think fantasy, because I've read mostly fantasy, is doing it better than anyone else because like you had just said so beautifully, you're not marketing it as the trope. It's just a part of the story. Like it's just a part of everyone's story. Yes. And I just think it was so beautifully done.
But you'll see that a lot with all of my books is the LGBTQ. I'm very passionate about that. I mean, that's one of the few topics that I will literally physically and verbally fight someone on with people's like rights. And so for me, it was just like, this is a normal aspect in life. Every single person knows someone who loves someone. And so a lot of my readers love it and they mention it, but it has actually not been in any of my marketing or any of that.
Yeah.
Other than there's been a couple of things I've mentioned that like, if you don't like this, then basically like don't read my books.
Don't follow me.
Don't read my books if you don't like this, but it's huge. So that is something you can see for me moving forward with all my books is you will see that representation in all of my books because it's important. People need to be represented and seen and understand that I see their relationships and I think they're beautiful. Even if you are uncomfortable doing it, I think if you feel like it needs to be done in your book, find some sensitivity readers, find some people, and include it, even if you feel nervous at first, because you have that feeling for a reason to include it. So it's my hill I'll die on.
I've never heard the term sensitivity reader. I can infer what that means, and that's really interesting to think about, like, because I hear what you're saying and about how like even influencers I'll hear, not even relating to books, just like regular social media influencers, like, I don't feel like this is my place to talk about topic because I'm not informed on the topic. And obviously sensitivity reader is tangentially related, but just how like I'm guessing it's someone who's there to say, hey, you're misspeaking on this topic, or like let me this is actually insensitive how you're saying it.
Yeah, it's the concept of like if you're touching on topics that people feel uncomfortable with, you get a sensitivity reader who can say, oh, let's say you have, Lahana. So Lahana, she has a partner, and someone could say in my novella, I want to get a sensitivity reader. It could be like, I want Lahana and her partner's relationship to be very real. I don't want it to be objectified because lesbian women are constantly objectified in their relationships. And so I will definitely be looking for a sensitivity reader to make sure I'm not objectifying those moments between the two of them. And it's all about like their intimacy as a couple. And so I don't know if a lot of authors know about it, but you can definitely get sensitivity readers who can give you that perspective of you're kind of speaking out of turn, or hey, this is actually kind of a misconception, or like this was really well done, like thank you for doing it. So,
and because it might not be like your lived experience, but you want to include it, I think that's so important to have somebody whose lived experience it is who can speak to it. And I love that so much. I've never heard of that. I really, really enjoyed learning about that. So thank you for sharing that.
There's a lot of people who will do that for authors, and it's like a great little community of people who will do that.
That's amazing. So anyone out there that is writing a book and thinks that this would be something they could benefit from, and I think the world can benefit from, definitely check out some sensitivity readers. That's awesome. Before we wrap up, CA, is there anything else that you were like, you know what, I really want to talk about this, but we didn't get a chance to?
So I think the biggest thing to kind of entice people to read my book, the ending is going to wreck you.
Yeah.
It's going to hurt you. But you get book 2 in December.
Okay, that makes me feel better. A Christmas present.
It is not like I'm going to just stomp on you and then you're waiting for a year.
Yes.
I am actively working on book 2. It is coming out December 1st. Read the book if you just love those type of books that gives you like that book hangover and like cliffhanger. knowing you'll get it 6 months later.
Good. So Threads of Fate is out June 1st. And then the next sequel is Bindings of Fate, and that's out in December 2024.
Yeah, so you will get it 6 months later. I mean, that feels like a long time, but it will fly by, and you will just get some answers. There's a lot of questions about Aura and who she is and where her
lots of questions.
Lots of questions that do get answered in book 2.
Amazing.
So.
We love to hear that. And where can readers follow you on your journey? Where can they find your book on June 1st to purchase it?
So they can find the book on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and like basically any major retailer.
Amazing.
Some places you might have to request it, like your local Target, you might have to go in and ask and they'll have to order it. I am working with some bookstores right now to get them inside indie bookstores and some bigger bookstores to get them in there that aren't necessarily connected to Barnes & Noble.
Amazing.
And then on social media, you can find me at Pink Office Author on TikTok and Instagram.
Love.
You can kind of see my office, but it's like all pink and pretty and I love it. And then there will be, I just ended my Kickstarter campaign for special editions. There will be another one at the end of the year for book 2 for people that like the special edition pretty books.
Yes.
And so
amazing.
you can keep an eye out for that for book 2 as well if they want something pretty on their shelves. The normal editions will be doors, because doors are huge, so very specific doors for each book will be the theme of the normal books.
Okay.
And special editions will be certain landscapes of the world.
So excited. Well, thank you again, C.A. Blooming, for joining us for our Romantasy Author Spotlight today. We are truly so excited to keep bringing you more author spotlights and Batty content, so stay tuned.
If you like what we have to say and want to hear more, please leave us a review and follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Instagram, and YouTube at Batty Girls Book Club. And don't forget to stay batty.